Delighted to introduce our colleague and friend Lauren as well. So Lauren's going to talk to you about some of her experiences, both personal and professional. So over to you, Lauren. And you are on mute there, just so you know, Lauren.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much to Paul and Nicola for having me here today on the session. And all I can say is yes, and I can say it with actual authority, because as Paul and Nicola have said, I've been a client and also a candidate. So I'm going to speak to you about my experiences from both of those different vantage points. So I'll start off with a little bit about myself. So I am originally from Michigan in the United States. I've actually put a little picture down there. It's the Great Lakes state, so we border on with Canada, but I have been living and working in Ireland since 1999. So I've been here a while now. I've held a variety of HR leadership positions across various blue chip companies and industries. You can see on the right-hand side. My most recent life sciences role was as the head of employee experience and employee relations with Takeda for Ireland and Canada. I am no longer with Takeda, and that's kind of how I came with my journey to be a candidate with Right Management. I have secured a new role, but I'll be speaking about the Takeda experience. I'm a qualified workplace investigator, mediator, and career coach. And as I said, most recently, I am a candidate of Right Management. So thank you. Right. So what I'll talk about first really is my experience as a client, as Takeda Ireland went through a number of iterative projects resulting in the need for outplacement. And then I will share a little bit about my own journey. And then I'm going to wrap up with just some key learnings and takeaways from myself, really being in that HR leadership space around restructuring. And, if that can be of any use to anybody on this call, maybe it will. I know there's a lot of activity in the marketplace. I know you're all sitting across the globe, so I probably should have started with good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. But hopefully if any of these takeaways are helpful, that's why I put them in at the very end. But if we start with Takeda Ireland and Right Management. So Takeda started to work with Right Management really in 2019. And in my tenure, there were 3 sort of separate, discrete outplacement engagements with Right Management. And I'll just take you through how they came about. For those of you who might be on the call in the world of pharma, you may recall that Takeda acquired Shire Pharmaceuticals here in Ireland, globally, but Shire Pharmaceuticals is here in Ireland in 2019. And if you've been through mergers and acquisitions, there's a lot of harmonization that needs to take place. There's a lot of synergetic activity, I would call, that has to take place, whether it's systems or it's people or it's roles. And typically that does result in some type of a restructure. And that's what happened in 2019 and 2021. Following Takeda's acquisition of Shire, there was significant reorganization resulting in roles in 2019 really moving to Łódź, Poland, and just a general downsizing. And so there was sort of part 1 in 2019, and then we had part 2 in 2021. It affected mainly the Bagot Street site and legacy Shire roles, and roles that mainly were in finance, treasury, including some transactional roles such as accounts payable and some back office type of activity, but really it was office-based. That's really what happened in 2019 and in 2021. In 2024, some of you may recall last year, there was actually the failure to gain approval in the North American market for a specific product. And that actually resulted in a full plant closure in the Grange Castle facility. So that was a pilot plant manufacturing a medicine that was due to go into production. And unfortunately, it did not gain approval for licensing in Canada and the United States. Thus, the plant needed to close. And that resulted in 80 roles being made redundant, including manufacturing and quality roles, as well as mid to senior level scientific roles and some management as well. So that was the manufacturing site. So it's a bit of a compare and contrast here. So we had the office-based situations in 2019 and 2021, and then 2024 was the manufacturing plant. And it's really, I think, key to note for anybody who's maybe on this call where this is your first rodeo, where you're having to maybe look at some of the stuff. 2019 was the first major large-scale restructuring activity for Takeda. So, when I speak a little bit more about the support Right Management gave us, I think there were good synergies and it was a strong partnership, and Right Management understood this was new territory for Takeda and what goes along with that. By the time we got to 2021 and 2024, obviously we had processes in place, but it was good to work with a partner at the out who understood this is the first time that we were doing it. Thank you. So this slide, I guess we're calling it the case study 3. It's kind of the same information, but just sort of put into a table format just for ease of, I guess, looking at it. So as I said, 2019 and 2021 were really post-acquisition restructures. Again, who was impacted? And then in 2024, we had a plant closure. And you'll recall from Paul's slides when he was talking about the different programs, what we really utilized were the 3 and 6 month individual programs in all of those situations. And all of our right management programs were a combination of group workshops and webinars, one-to-one meetings, and portal and technology enablement. And it's also important to note, in 2021, we were in the throes of COVID. So any of our consultation, any of our meetings that we had to have were fully remote. And I do think there is a high degree of skill required, which right management achieved in terms of managing sensitively via our Teams or Zoom or whatever. It was new for everybody. So there was a lot happening with the employees. And I can't really stress enough, when Paul and Nicola talk about the ethos being people-centric, I've lived it, right? I've lived it on both sides. And, certainly when we were in the middle of COVID and nobody could sit in a room with each other during these sensitive times, right management really rose to the occasion. So a big thank you to right management. Okay, so outplacement considerations, I suppose, for Takeda. So I've kind of given you the result, but what really kind of went into thinking about how do we pick a provider? What are we looking for? Well, I think first and foremost, and I'm sure many of you on this call feel the same, it's really about the employee experience. I know many of you, I'm sure, are HR professionals on the call, and we focus so heavily on the employee experience, whether it's onboarding or recruitment or our compensation or our reward strategy. But the exit strategy is not always something we like to think about or have to talk about. And yet it is so critical because that's the lasting memory. How was I treated? And for us in Takeda at the time, it was very important, and I'm sure it's still very important, that, people felt they were exiting with dignity. I'm a valued person. I made a contribution and now I want to go with dignity. Because for some people, it may be a welcome release. And for other people, it could really be Nicola's slides, I thought, that talked about the overwhelming realities of career transition. I'm looking at notes because I was writing it down as she was doing it. And the second slide after that, where it talked about the psychological impacts of job loss. They're not to be underestimated, right? And we want to know as employers that we are doing the very best we can do for all of these people who have created success for our organizations. So the people-centric ethos was key consideration for our impacted colleagues. I'll talk more really on my final slide about organizational restructuring, but there are multiple moving parts. For any of you who've been through it or you're about to go through it, it can seem really overwhelming. There are so many moving parts and so many stakeholders and levers you're trying to pull. And HR oftentimes is really at the center of it, trying to hold it together in a very fast-moving situation that's constantly changing and evolving. And there's many, many people and stakeholders you need to manage. So it was great to have right management there as a trusted collaborative partner to really know in this outplacement space, they've got it. In terms of the engagement process itself, so the nuts and bolts that Paul really talked about in terms of when we engage, what happens, again, right management, knowledgeable on, their business, very responsive. Again, you're moving in this very fast place and space, very responsive. We have a question. We have to do something differently. Can we pivot? We're in the middle of COVID. All these different considerations. Nothing was really a problem, which is what you really need. And also flexible. So, there may be, we wanted to flex up with some aspects of program and flex down with others. Both Paul and Nicola spoke extensively about, the different levels of employees and making sure it's a good fit. And I can speak to that myself when we talk about my own situation. But that flexibility and, at times even a bespoke feeling, along with being knowledgeable and responsive, again, trusted partner and collaboration. And the way we selected the programs, because we also touched on this earlier in the presentation, was really about market considerations and reemployability. So we took a look at 3-month programs for maybe individual contributors and some of our manufacturing personnel, because really research was telling us that 3 months, give or take, was probably going to be the job search before they were to land a similar or better position. And then correspondingly for more senior roles, 6 months was typically what based on what the market at the time is saying is the duration of time. So that's, sometimes people might ask, well, why was it 3 months and 6 months? That's really what drove those decisions. Okay, next slide, please. So that was kind of the very quick wrap up on the experience with Right Management. Extremely positive, certainly from a client point of view. And I suppose I can now move into my own experience with Right Management. And this is when I said at the beginning, yes to Paul and Nicola, and yes to Paul and Nicola on both sets of slides, because I really can say that my experience has been positive. I've been able to avail of the executive outplacement service. And, I put this bullet point together before I even had seen the other slides that we were going to go through. But a very supportive environment. And I can't really stress this point enough when we talk about the right fit with the program, when we talk about, increasing confidence, when we talk about the sense of, the overwhelming, position you might be in if you find yourself like, unemployed. So it was a really supportive environment. And where I want to go with this is, so I have been in HR for over 25 years. Okay. So I'm dating myself a little bit. And, I would be the person where everybody would say, hey, could you look at my CV? Blah, 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 blah. And I'd be like, yeah, no problem. Like I'm in HR. And then I found myself on the other side of the experience. And I like the world had just changed. Technology had changed. The way you look for a job changed. Understanding how LinkedIn and its algorithms completely new to me. And, Nicola pointed out in one of her slides, ghost opportunities. I mean, these were just things that weren't in my world previous. And what I can definitely say that Right Management provided me with was, first of all, an absolutely wonderful coach. I don't know if the person's on the call or not, but a coach who really, at times, also, I think, flexed his skill and talent to become a mentor. While for me, a career transition was the right move, I knew that I was a little bit reluctant. My confidence probably wasn't where I would have liked it to have been. And so for me, and this whole idea of the self-enablement, working with the coach that I had, he was able to kind of bring me through some of the technology aspects. So how does LinkedIn work? And without the coach, I really feel I would not have been where I got, bringing me from a place of probably reluctance to confidence and excitement about new opportunities, but helping me understand about brand. I mean, when I had last looked for a job, the conversation about brand was there, but probably not broadly. And then, of course, the CV review and just the general coaching discussions about, well, what is next? Is it time to pivot? And teasing that out, because as Nicola said in her talk, the outplacement time, I think if used well and you have a good partner, can be a really effective and powerful tool for self-reflection for people to really make the next best move. In addition to having my coach, I also had access to the different portals, the digital platforms, and again, responsive, knowledgeable, and professional and human. I probably should have put human on this, but hopefully that is definitely coming across, and what I'm expressing verbally is human, is how I would absolutely say Right Management has been for me. So can't say enough good. So thank you for that. And then my final slide is really about just my own key learnings, having gone through a number of restructurings. We focused on Takeda, but throughout my career, I've been through a number of them. And for anybody who's out there who might be facing into it, I think there are really three different kind of boxes that I put things in. The first one is critical foundations, so kind of a tier one. And that's really about knowing your landscape. So, the legal and the compliance landscapes, social and cultural norms. So an example of that might be social plans in countries, societal norms, what happens during a restructuring, stakeholder alignment early on and comprehensive. So again, made mention of that earlier, that there are a lot of stakeholders, and it can be very challenging to get everybody on board. And HR, again, often at the center of it, but you need to get stakeholder alignment early on and make sure that you're getting all the stakeholders in the room. You won't agree on the first conversation, but hopefully you'll get there. Roles, responsibilities, and governance. Again, lots of moving parts here. But when we take a look at typically who are the key stakeholders we have here, who is doing what, how are decisions being made, and by whom? And if we have to course correct or pivot, how do we make sure it's very clear that's what we're actually doing? And then finally, organization and project management execution. It can be an Excel spreadsheet, but it has to be something, and it has to be good, and it has to be organized. The next tier I would call trusted external partners. So whether that's your outplacement or your pensions or your tax advice, your trade unions, and your government relationships, understand who those people are and how are you working with them. Okay. And then finally, aftermath tier three, This is possibly more relevant in Europe, but mechanism for grievance and challenge. If there are questions that arise about why people were selected for things like redundancy, compliance follow-up activities. So make sure you've done everything you need to do to tick the boxes, and then the effective wrap-ups that you have in your organization. So that's me, and thank you for your time.